Hi, everybody. Welcome to part 5 of the Segue Reading Series. I'm Imogen Christian Smith. My pronouns are they, them.
And I'm Kay Gabriel. My pronouns are she and her. Before we get started, we acknowledge that we're calling from Lenape-Hoking on the traditional lands of the Lenape, Shinnecock, Munsee, and Canarsie peoples. That resources used in the production of this series have been called from stolen lands far and near. That both artist space as well as our homes, places of commune work and learning were built by hands other than our own, by people with varying histories, traditions, hopes, mourning, and vision for the ongoingness of their communities. We encourage participants in this gathering to learn about the history of the land where they live and the contemporary structures of possession and dispossession that we can intervene in principled and solidaristic ways, against the contemporary regimes of capital, colony, and property.
Thank you, Kay. We're really excited to present readings over the next 3 Saturdays, 4 including today's, bittersweetly coming to an end, broadcasting from our homes to yours. After today's reading with Nicholas Glastonbury and John Keene, we'll hear from Amber Dawn and Kai Chang Tom, Jackie S. and Diana Cage, and finally Anais Duplan and Legacy Russell. The readings are presented and recorded through Artist Space, yay, and we want to say thank you to the Artist Space staff, Izzy Dow, Stella Stillman, Jay Sanders, and Eric Wren, who designed the tiles for this series. The readings will be broadcast every Saturday at 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, so mark your calendars, tell all your pals, and will be recorded and live online afterwards on the Artist Space site. The suggested donation is $5, and you can donate via PayPal, Venmo, or through the Segue website. In the chat, there is going to be a link that appears and reappears periodically, so you'll be able to find that. The run of show tonight is like this. Let's see. What is the run of show tonight? I'm looking at the wrong script.
The wrong script. The run of show is that I am going to introduce Nick. Nick is going to read. We'll take an intermission. Imogen is going to introduce John. John will read, and then we will have a Q&A. And everyone can see at the bottom of your screen, there will be a little Q&A function. If you have questions for our panelists, we invite you to submit them through that function as opposed to posting them in the chat. And that way we will not lose them, and you can just use the chat to be, I don't know, like celebratory or rowdy or whatever.
Both things.
Both, definitely.
So you can offer scathing critiques, especially of Kay and I's fashion choices and curation.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's typically being bubblegum goth. And that's the way gender works. I think I'm going to introduce Nick. Okay. Oh, one other, for accessibility, if anybody needs a transcript, you can see that at the bottom of your screen as well. It's like not perfect, but it's fine. You should be able to click the like transcript button. Okay. Nicholas Glastonbury is a translator of Turkish and Kurdish literature. His translation of Every Fire You Tend by Semek Hayguzuz was the winner of the TA First Translation Prize from the Society of Authors in February. Congratulations, Nick. He is a doctoral candidate in cultural anthropology at Keene Graduate Center. So something we set out to do in this Segue series was to bring writers into a space that's traditionally been a poetry space, but have those writers address it using tools developed outside of the compositional mode of solo authored poetry. And so if you've been in the audience for a few Saturdays now, you might think of Terence Hayes's deck of poetry playing cards, or Momtaza Mary's documentary poem composed out of interviews with Somali domestic workers, or Ishmael Houston Jones's performance piece featuring poems read over a sort of derangingly loud soundtrack. And this week we are turning to translation, both from Nick and then later from our second guest, John Keene. And in that capacity, we're thinking about literary translation, but not just literary translation. We're thinking about the techniques of moving between languages and geographies. And we're thinking about translation as a tool of solidarity and internationalism, as well as its oblique relationship to love. Nicholas Glastonbury's practice of translation directly foregrounds those dynamics, I think, and so often obscured in what John has argued is a severely limited market for literary translation, formed unevenly around the tastes and interests of a largely white international bourgeoisie. In his afterword to his translation of Sima Kaiguzuz's Every Fire You Tend, a novel in part about the massacre carried out by the Turkish government in 1937 to 38 against a group of Zaza-speaking Alevi Turks, Alevi Kurds in the Dersim region of Eastern Anatolia. Glastonbury writes, quote, it is no coincidence that the very same ideologues who planned and executed the Dersim massacre had, less than a decade earlier, embarked on an ambitious campaign to reform the Turkish language. Quote, the language's extreme self-surgery was aided by popular campaigns to patrol and subdue the use of Kurdish, Greek, Armenian, Ladino, Arabic, and other languages. This rhetorical move consolidated the central value of pure Turkish to the nationalist project. At the same time, it consigned these other languages and their speakers to obsolescence and obliteration. Moving with Kayguzuz against this history of nationalism and ethnic cleansing, Glastonbury asks, quote, how to translate a novel about the violent colonization of Dersim in the past, how to translate the histories of violence in a world where language has dried up, how to capture this novel's repertoire of sensuous intensities written in a language inherited from no one and akin to no one else's. Glastonbury's answer rests in an intentional and provocative opacity, dovetailing with what he describes as Kayguzuz's willful obfuscation, which, quote, foregrounds the linguistic and cultural intimacy that Turkish still shares with Arabic, Persian, and Kurdish. Glastonbury's practice into English pursues this course of an internationalism that, quote, punctures the ideological fabric, binding the Turkish linguistic nation in space and time. Only the past, he writes, can free us from the past. In translation, Glastonbury puts this injunction into practice, pursuing texts variously alive to history and counter-narrative, collectively producing a cultural memory against the enforced amnesia of colonial propaganda and its agents. His translation of Every Fire You Tend emphasizes Kayguzuz's history of the fig. Quote, the Pharisees gave it a name they chose for no other fruit they ate. This was because they peeled figs with an assiduous tugging, the same way they might have undressed a lover. Over time, it became shameful to be seen eating a fig in public. And even now, from Iran to Anatolia, you can't simply go up to a grocer and ask for figs. They'll give you a dirty look and pretend not to have heard your request. The prose turns more and more sensuous. In any case, it's not as if you eat a fig slice by slice. You make out with it. You have to plunge your mouth into it, suck it out. Its red flesh is effervescent, animate, quivering. You can't do anything else until you finish eating the fig because it makes your fingertips so sticky. Sensuousness in the form of the fig threads together people and places across gaps of distance, knowledge, time, and linguistic ability. As Glastonbury Riley acknowledges in an unpublished essay titled, quote, on the non-utopias of love and translation, you, quote, you decide to learn Turkish because at 18 you met a beautiful man who spoke Turkish, like so many people who learn so many languages. People get into all kinds of things for all kinds of undignified reasons, and then they choose what to do with themselves. But is sensuousness so undignified? Glastonbury's essay continues, quote, love unsettles the subject by highlighting the fact that it is constituted through its contingent relations with others. Unsettling takes the form of porosity, accident, contingency, and it gives way to an unstable collectivity out of which something firmer could be established. If the internationalism of translation poses itself, or can pose itself, as the antagonistic contradiction to what Glastonbury describes as a, quote, rolling sea of commerce, resources moving unevenly to the metropole, end quote, then such contingencies and intimacies will form part of the chaotic backdrop to these insurgent associations. As Glastonbury urges, we can't translate our way to utopia, but on the other hand, in our multiple disjointed and collective striving, we can't do without it either. And reading Glastonbury's work urges me to think that this project will be just as sensuous as it is practical. Please welcome Nicholas Glastonbury.
I'm so dazzled by that introduction. Thank you so much, Kay. I'm really grateful to UK and to the Imogen for inviting me to read for Segue, and I'm really, really just honored to be sharing this space with John Keene, who is just so so brilliant. It's really a privilege. And thanks also to everyone at Artist Space for making everything so easy. I'm conventionally a translator of prose, but today I'm really excited to be reading some poetry. I'm going to be reading translations of the poet Arkadaş Zekai Özger, who you can see here. He was born in 1948 and died in 1972 at the age of 25. His sort of poetic praxis is very interesting. His only book, which is called Tragedy of a Beardless Boy, came out after his death, and his poems have been taken up both by the Turkish left and also by queer movements in Turkey since then. I'm happy to talk more about him. I think he's a really interesting character. I really love him a lot, and I hope you like him too. So I have some poems for you from the book. Mending. Much as I insist on the wrong revolution, I can't persuade anyone I'm a proletarian son. I can't persuade my father he's a proletarian. Long ago, my father was a partisan who darned his hatred on the ruin of an old populist party. He knows hurt, knows those times better than me. When we drink at the end of a Friday night, he tells of hunger, tells of poverty better than me. I had one brother, two brothers. In a bad master's time, hunger and poverty took them both. Because those were the times when my sisters gathered trash at the market, when my brothers sold ice, while my father darned his hatred on the mending of bureaucrats' shoes. My mother, a casket of patience, my mother, a casket of pain. She nourished her heart with pain, sated her poverty and hunger with pain, and raised her baby with pain, birthed with pain. And I am the residue of a missing legacy, leavened in the past, my childhood, which always taught me pain and sorrow. I grew up with an inferiority complex, longing for days I never knew. Whenever I tried to approach bourgeois wannabes, my class pulled me back, embarrassed me. With the grudge in my trembling veins rising, the fire of my class burned in its retreat. So that's why I am a bourgeois puppet, a cowardly novice militant, close to sorrow and solitude. At the end of one Friday night, I saw anew the anvil and hammer my father struck with his hate for mending the bureaucrat's old shoes, the knife with which he stripped away his anger. It sits before me like a rose in bloom. Strike rose, strike rose, strike rose, strike the soles of the bourgeois shoes. And now my veins flow neither cold nor hot. It's just a knife, my rose, a knife to cut. The next poem is called Autumning. Through this world smeared in cheap and easy verse, I lean on poetry's filth, make myself ill, for springs, for summers, whether abstract or concrete, I can't bear it. Literature itches like a mangy cat, finding the way, the skill, I piss on those walls, such tall walls. Blood without pus is not beautiful, I say. Only a nun would so betray herself. When blood clots its Bordeaux, and as death reaches up its Bordeaux, because I say Bordeaux's a color, because where a bug lands on a flower, it breeds that Bordeaux flower for a widowed girl. I grow old. Bugs die. Poems, poems, a life's flowers wilting, everything wilting. Flowers and roses and roses and roses mate with a dead bug, inseminate a colorless rose. I grow old. Flowers, flowers, colors die. The bags under my eyes wrinkle. I see the girl distinct from myself. I find the girl past her prime, kiss her down there, because only bugs would so break an old girl's heart. I grow old, without flowers, without colors. Bordeaux once more, because once more, I say because only Bordeaux would so suit a suicide. Parasite bird. Evening. Pale mirror of my gloom, my blood boiling, my fingertips deepening in hurt. I bleed like I've seen red death. I am tired of replacing the blood in my heart, of being a song every day anew, of composing a new song every day, of moving house, I sorrows, I shadows, tenant. Every day, gloom surges through my body. My heart ages unbeknownst to everyone. They don't listen. No, they don't listen to a song. My solitude stills, multiplies. Oh, my careworn heart. Oh, my impartial heart. Oh, what do I have left? I can't reproduce on my own. Why make me like this? And now I imagine some ancient enosis, still a little echo, a little ant. I tear myself from myself, I can't reach. My solitude, tired broken-winged bird, seeking shade under sorrow's leaves, and who would tear from its branch a rose in bloom? I bleed like I've seen red death. I am tired of replacing the blood in my heart. The next poem is one of his few prose poems, and yeah, it's called Roused. Long ago, I was distances, I was handwriting, I was a shattered joy. Spick and span plaster well where pain and healing tamped my body down. I couldn't strike myself against those sturdy structures, but you know how there's that suspended memorial to love, how it bewilders whoever sees it. Once upon a time, the king of the country of orphans set the clock in his truly magnificent tower to tick day and night in sync with his own heartbeats. He hadn't freed very many slaves, but nobody had ever seen the color of his body from which hung those giant hands of his that held up his country's sky. Though nor could anybody say that the possibilities for him to open up to the world from that very narrow open window in the tower where he lived hadn't etched themselves onto his heart like a delicate painting. It was long ago. You would receive handwritten letters and you would write so many too. Was it little, the life you gave to the skeletons of love, smeared with the cartilage words of those firefighters smelling of mildew? Who among them could have understood the strength of your stubborn desire for arriving on the tired wings with which you absorbed distances, given that they dragged the pitiless caravans of existence for years into their own shadows, wearing false smiles all the way, as if they were paragons of righteousness themselves? What did you find by swaddling that mistake in a shroud of silk and insistently burying it in the fertile soils of hope? In the end, it became an aged routine that, with the bitterness of wind, scorched the breast of what was won. You could not name truth from lie. That was your mistake. O heart, inheritance of my trembling kingdom, O solitude, my darling, dispensing affection to your rioting soldiers. Untie now the threads of your pandemic and release that individualist riddle of yours, that parched tremor to the world. The gleaming spear you passed masterfully amid the pigeons and birds of prey will surely find a cursed cloud in the arena of the sky. Now your task is to heal with old handwritten letters the wounds left by the corkscrewed melancholies of the past. Forget now the savage taste of the waiting you multiplied in those slipshod sincerities of shattered friendships, portioning out your joys to the distances. What matters is being conscious of what you've lived, what you've done while you've lived, what is to be done, and what, big and small, is provisional here. It is always considered too soon to raise this consciousness. Know this. Nothing is without end. Know this too. One day, one way or another, all pains will age. This is life, what you bear year after year across your torment. All that's worth chasing at full gallop, even with its insistent delay, is there. Hear the ticks and talk of the clock rebelling. Rescue your heart. Beat your hope on crowded trees, on branches sated by speculation, on foaming, flowing waters, on mountains roused by the smell of wildflowers. Fiddle with the mysterious sack of living. Envy the brotherhood of bread and sweat. To teach you of earth and love, run after the mother called life. The next poem is called Whetstone. My heart bitten off by a gnawing order is a white death warrior in a pillage black. Waves break, striking against my heart. My blood is seawater, stoking my hair. My head heads up a rebellion. My heart heartens like a keen sickle, again, 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 against something. Here's the title poem where the camp is really on sort of full display. Tragedy of a Beardless Boy. I lost my beard in a Charlie Chaplin war. The deadlocked picket sounds beating back my hope. I let parrot doubts defeat my mustache, scraped off my beard with candied apple, scraped off my beard with postpartum sherbet. You want a bite of my paprika lahmacun cheeks? Don't you dare say, there you have it, such an autumn for such a face. Even if you do, there's no beard at its tip. This autumn yielded no crop, next year a bounty of mustache. I did it, so you won't have to. I'll give you some beard. With my needle and thread, I'll sew you mustache. You want a cookie from my rocky road cheeks? Excuse me, miss, wait a sec, there's a bird in your eye. This mustache doesn't match your tone of voice. Your beard's grown long, down to your waist. Put it in a ponytail, braid it, cut your cat's mustache with a straight razor. You need some mineral oil for my whetstone cheeks? I am but a poor, fickle customer. Do you sell sun here? I'll take some cactus. Give me a couple clouds too for my flowers to grow. They've been so cold, the sun will make them schizophrenic. Quick, please, their thorns will wither. You need cold water for my Gobi Desert cheeks. My face is an old actress as it ages. Shirley Temple. An onion bulb and a garlic bulb in each hand. Gosh, you're such a joker. Haven't you ever played Hamlet? To be or not to be, that is the question. You need a comb for my Yule Brynner cheeks? Season of gloom. Night falls like a coffin on my shoulders. The wind of corpses sigh. Aggrieved, I imagine a house far away. The uncountable stars far away longing. Only I know longing. And the owl in night's eyes, owl's an ugly bird, owl's an evil bird. I adorn it in my grief, my gilded grief. I gild a roof with my grief. I gild my roof. I've never seen you so close. The uncountable stars, far away longing. My brother's face, sculpted by pain, falls into my palms like an old pigeon. The sound fades, his pain stays. He recites advice I know by heart. Hey kid, Don't let your heart go cold, for now is the season of gloom, passing through all poems. I'm a homebody born and raised. Migration is not my charge. Alone, I'm quick to long. I'm afraid of the dark, and if it's winter, if it's raining, and if my mother's not with me, and if the thunder crashes, I am so afraid. I weep. Mama, melt lead for me. Pray, blow, Mama. Mama, I'm still so small. Sing me a lullaby, Mama. I'm alone. I've always said so. I'm alone. I've always said so. I nail night to a cross that no one worships. I weigh out my gloom. It overflows my heart. I wonder just how much everything can be. My nails bleed when I touch my face. Night kneading together my gloom and my loneliness. You are so ordinary. You're inside every poem. I know. I know, and I know that even if as many lines are written as there are stars in the sky, I have no self for myself except myself, no love to gird my shame, no girl to kiss my ugliness. My loneliness makes my loneliness lonely. Mama, something happened to me. I always tremble like this. Mama, I am so cold. Warm me some linden. The uncountable stars, faraway longing. I'm longing for love, faraway love. O humans, O judges of my nightly forgottenness, I abhor kissing your fingers. I abhor it. First, I embrace all of you. I kiss your mouths, your lips, your teeth. I don't know. I kiss myself. The sheets are a coitus. A wet night can multiply no more than itself. A worm grows another ring on its body. Pain is impregnated. Love-making becomes androgyne. I knew gloom. I should tell you one day I should tell you about gloom. If sun's strength is spent, the sky reflecting the mist in your eyes, your pain pregnant with the death of all pain, don't be afraid, little one. Neither night nor night can insult your innocent antagonisms, that heart of yours you gave to kiss a monster. To become beautiful, to lie on love's breast, a bit of love for a person, a bit tired, a bit cowardly, a bit leaning against the wall of night, to kiss a corpse's mouth, its lips a bit. The uncountable stars, far away longing. I'm longing for love, far away love. Oh, night, playing tambourines in my blood, coming with the season, drowning my voice in jackal, strike my anguish, strip my pain, surround me and my face innocent as Boris Karloff's, with your darkness, with Frankenstein, because now I must nourish that hate inside me. My heart, which has subscribed to kindness for years, abandons the birds of love wherever it sees a human, because it has mercy on its judges who can't make their own laws. O culprits of my nightly forgottenness, O wrong adjudicators of wrongfulness, my crime, orphaning my hate, my defense was all to exalt my love. I don't have a beard, I know, but I'm not evil. I respect the elderly. I love the young. I adore kids, would never hurt them. I know how to kiss a woman. I know how to kiss you and you. Mama, I'm very lonely. I have no other love. Gloom grows inside me, a bloom of shame. Oh, my love that knows no rules, my contrary, my metaphysic, my supernatural, my wrongfulness, my love. My dear mistake, my chief justice, my hate, where are you? Oh heart, one day I'm sure I will conquer you. I'm sure this season of gloom will end the day an owl befriends a sparrow. On that day, I'll tell you of joy. The day a worm mates with a stork, and on that day, which is the season of spring, I'll tell you of love. And one day I'm sure I will count the stars. Come hold me. I can't count the stars. The next poem is called Earth Tree. Winter is coming, my hand beneath the leaf. Blow, ye seemanly winds, strike my cracked body, thresh my heart, for the love of the righteousness of the restored bas reliefs of history. Impregnate me with myself. Winter is coming, and how crowded the bus. Lean on me, earth tree, for the fertility of your thorny trunk. Is it maddening manure you seek? Try your root in my soil. Winter is coming. O jacket, protect my body. Where are the winter birds to land in my mouth? Hold my hand, babe. History, they say, consists of repetition. They say what they say is a culprit of the past. O mankind, kiss me at 5 Ishtars. Being a poet's not easy, sweetie, when your dick's so pretty. Here, axe-bearing riches, chopping a living tree. There, shit-filled ditches, making my blood seethe. Now they'll judge me for the multiplication of my cells, surely. The next poem is called Hello Dear, in Turkish, Merhaba Canım, which is the title of a forthcoming documentary, actually, about the poet. Hello Dear. I'm someone who talks hard and sleeps easy. I like to drink wine with helva. I have never prayed in my whole life. I like my mother and also God very much. My mother also likes God very much. Our whole family, in fact, likes a little God and cats very much. Life is a tragic homosexual. I think all homosexuals are Adonis a little bit because all drunkenness is a little bit like the sober ravings of Freud. You won't believe me, but one day I'm sure the way of the wind praising the sun and the penis will change because I think I must have read something about how women somewhere are sold to gods. Oh dear Aristophanes, I've never forgotten peace or the wasps. I keep death like a secret inside me. I save death for God. And you won't understand it all, but one day, my body growing toward the sun, toward manhood, will slip through your hands. And one day, I'm sure you will love Zeki Müren. Please love Zeki Müren. I should add, Zeki Müren is a famous Turkish singer who is kind of a Turkish Liberace figure. He's here in a really incredible look. I wanted to come to you in this look tonight, but because of pandemic reasons, I was unable to procure this exact outfit, so bear with me. And then I'm going to finish out with a poem called By Love for You, which was a poem that the poet wrote for a friend of his who was killed by the police in a raid of a dormitory where students were organizing. And that friend was maybe a lover. It's kind of unclear. And yeah, it's kind of where I want to end. By love for you. Warming your forehead by the mountain fire, washing your face with blood. Comrade, let the Bordeaux rose on your sleeping lips be a rebellion to thresh my heart. And let the silence growing as a tremor in your now motionless body one day be a Mauser, impatient to go off in my hand. Rest your head on my shoulder. Let me carry you on my breast. Let my body be life for your body. Tell me, moth, O harbinger of death, which cub is brave on its own? Which fire goes out on its own? Ah, everyone's quiet. Nobody knows the fire inside me. Ah, everyone's quiet. My friend who tied my heart to his. Ah, everyone's quiet. When friends whose hearts resemble ours abandon themselves to the world like crucifixes, when life's fire-colored butterflies are smitten one by terrible collectors. Ah, everyone's quiet. Do I scream the horror I contain? Will my rage pierce the earth? Life that heals me with pain that jolts my comrade with love. My chest went up in flames with what down. I drained its passion for you. The ancient sun cracking open the world's new spring. And when the blood of saplings punctured my chest, I held on to you. I clung to you. Because you were my mother's fertile womb, because you were the breast nursing my beloved, because you were my friend's fertile rose. Don't leave me hopeless. Don't console me with history. Because I was tried by love for you I was tried by fire, by water, by flame, by death, by petal, by poem. O pain, bleeding in life, lightning bright sky, flood, storm of blood, grass grown quickly on the edge of a cliff, for the memory of a petalless death, for the skin of tender sheep. Console me not with history. Leave me not hopeless. If I drain my maddening passion, will life-giving water bubble up? Ah, my seven-headed eagle, resting every head on this peak, your body winds like a living river. Fear of those who would sully our love. Because of course water knows just how hard the earth it flows through is. And when that shaft of water tears through the earth, now it is called a river, now revolution, the name for the momentum of this flow. I know what will happen tomorrow. Spring will come, grass will grow. Death too will flower. I'll find a mountain, watch it a while, and when I see a drop of sun stirring aromas in a pine tree's shadow, tomorrow too I'll smile at you. Because tomorrow a garden will grow on the grasses where you lie down now. Thank you.
Gosh, thank you so much, Nick. It's wonderful to hear those out loud. I was lucky enough to get them before the reading. And I mean, I love the kind of the camp of it. I love the melodrama, and I also love like the really deep sincerity because he actually says what is to be done. Like I think that was in one of the poems. So that's cool. We can all sit with that. We are going to take a break for like 5 to 7 minutes. Enjoy the music, as Imogen and I were posting about in the chat. Get a drink, take care of yourself. When we come back, please donate to our readers. That information will be posted in the chat, as well as it will appear on a tile where my face is now. So that'd be great. And when we come back, we will have our second reader, John Keene. So don't go away. Thank you so much.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. First of all, Nick, that was amazing. Thank you. My gay little heart is both pining and cooing ever so gently. I'm obsessed, want to know everything. Here we are. Hope you had a good break. Hope you enjoyed those jams. Next up, we have John Keene, which is amazing. John Keene is author and co-author of a handful of books, these included, including the award-winning collection Counter Narratives and the forthcoming collection Punks, and has received many honors, including a 2018 Wyndham Campbell Prize and a 2018 MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. His translation projects include poetry, fiction, and essays from Portuguese, French, and Spanish, among them the Brazilian writer Hilda Hilst's novel Letters from a Seducer. His essay Translating Poetry, Translating Blackness, featured on the Poetry Project's website, Harriet, has helped to encourage and galvanize translators of Black non-Anglophone writing, and he serves as a member of organizational committee for the African Poetry Book Series under the auspices of the University of Nebraska's African Poetry Book Fund and Prairie Schooner. He chairs the Department of African American and African Studies, is Distinguished Professor of English and African American Studies, and also teaches in the Rutgers Newark MFA in Creative Writing program at Rutgers University, Newark. In his ever unfurling capacities as storyteller, author, we might say at times channel, and translator, John Keene's cross-disciplinary work braids together counter-archives, alternate epistemologies, and infinite openings where African, African-American, and Afro-diasporic modes of inquiry, interrelation, and meaning community making interrupt the imposed sacredness of a Euro-American so-called objectivity. Memory, as Keene observes in the opening pages of annotations, quote, that vast orchard of myriad variegated moments appears to undergo an endless replanting, end quote. It is within this project of endless replanting that Keene's work continuously weaves, variegating our sense of what can be known and how should we take up the vital work of expanding our conceptions of what language can do beyond the colonial confines of canon, epistemological approach, and our general human capacity to commune across difference. Quote, I see my translation projects as a lifeline linking me to other writers and cultures across the globe, a lifeline to bring them into English and to bring and keep us, I and all who read my translations, however flawed, into conversation, community, and contact, end quote. Keene's work is planted firmly, even faithfully in the earth, which is, after all, the created space over which language flows in polyphonic bursts, deep knowledge residing in the details. Quote, her family had washed north in several tides, the main ebbing occurring shortly after the First World War. Whether they came by train or by carriage bears important historical implications, end quote. Upon the minutiae of these representations that echo throughout Keene's work, be it in the gaze of Eugenie over Carmel or Carmel's own being reaching elsewhere and out, or the moment Jim locks his sights on Huck, or the moment Jim locks his sights on Huck at Civil War's end, the implications for interpersonal dynamics are never more unclear. It is here that the ethics underlying Keene's projects as translator translate themselves into his fiction to, quote, reconfigure how we think about the world, our neighbors, our sisters and brothers, and ourselves, to see, to listen, to pay attention in new ways, to continue developing lines of exchange, end quote. What does the translator bring to the text, however flawed and open to subsequent critique and revision said translation might be? To quote again from annotations, the kitchen of his body in which the fires of history were blazing. Feeding this fire is the necessity for counter-epistemologies that might accurately bring one form of justice and envisioning to a world wrought from the wake. Indeed, as Keene is always well aware, the fabric of our political, social, our celestial life is dependent on such an approach. Quote, why is this absence of translated Black voices significant? One of the ongoing problems, if I can state it bluntly, is that if we already are experiencing serious and ongoing crises in American society, in part through the omission, elision, and erasure of and indifference to narratives, stories, and other forms of an imaginative expression in all their complexity of Black American people's lives and existences, we further limit our understanding of the world. In the absence of Black stories and voices from outside the Anglosphere, which is not a coherent whole, but nevertheless is limited in its capacity to convey the breadth of experience of Black peoples across the globe. Just as Black Americans are hardly a fringe, neither are Black people and voices from the rest of the world, end quote. Autodidaxy, a term I happily borrow from Keene, presents to us in cases where archives, canons, and our concepts of what stories do receive epistemological expansion, as well as associability, openings for futurisms, world buildings, and meaning making beyond the empire's wildest, most nightmarish dreams. Quote, I assimilated the grammar long before I had ever heard anyone speak the language or could read or speak it myself. End quote, or also our ears hammer impressions into audible jewels. Here's another. Certain sensations are unendurable in sequential form. Even small animals recognize this, end quote. In his introduction to Henry Dumas' forthcoming collected short fiction, Echo Tree, Keene offers a vision of the late author that could easily double as statement of purpose for his own projects, both in the worlds of translation and prose. Quote, as his fiction underlines, African American and African diasporic vernacular cultures, including superstitions, folk spiritual and religion, and legends and tall tales, should be understood not as opposed to knowledge and reason, but as heralds of alternative epistemologies and necessary guides and tools for understanding and processing the complex and contradictory realities around us. In effect, creating a counter epistemology directly linked to the creativity born of imagination, improvisation, and resistance that was and remains crucial for the survival and self-determination of people of African descent in America and across the globe, end quote. Part the grasses and witness Mannahatta's rolling hills. Tremble before the power of spirit and body, interconnecting in gloss or the strange history of Our Lady of the Sorrows. Push back at the smallness of breadth and vision imposed upon the world through supposed unmarketability and racism within industries of literary translation. Under what circumstances, Keene invites us to ask, are there any benefits to dedication, devotion, honor, responsibility? Only repetition produces tangible benefits, which include the stability of a routine, however precarious, and the forestalling of longer-term considerations that might provoke the following emotions: fear, indecision, paralyzing despair. The question of ethics intrudes. What is the non-material or spiritual component? To the ancestors, their memory, to the elusive community of the self and its desires, constancy or consistency, what if these are in conflict, end quote. Keene's work provides a framework for no less than how to be more human, the curiosity latent in what we share, how we share it, and how unlimited our conception of the real might become. Please join me in welcoming John Keene.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Imogen. I mean, oh my God, maybe I should just stop now. No, I mean, thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. Thank you to both you and Kay for organizing this reading. It was such an honor. It's such an honor to be reading with Nick. So then Nick, thank you for those beautiful translations. And thanks also to Artist Space and the Segue series. This is a wonderful, wonderful series. I'm going to dedicate this reading tonight to the poet, essayist, activist, organization builder, and mentor to so many, Colin Robinson, who passed away just a few days ago. So I thought I would start actually reading in another language. And this is, I think of this poem as a kind of palate cleanser in a way. It's by a contemporary Francophone poet, Sunjata, and I'll just say Sunjata is the pen name of Sumaila Koli, who's a writer, musician, filmmaker, producer, and actor of Ivorian descent, born in Paris in 1971. And of course, the interesting thing about his pen name is that it invokes, of course, the great epic of northwestern Africa, West Central Africa, the great, I think, Malian epic Sunjata. So anyway, this is a poem by Sunjata. The French title is Palabre, and you'll hear he's a spoken word poet whose work also includes, the influence of hip hop and really sort of interesting polyrhythms. So let's see if I can do this in the French, and then I'll read my English. Palabre. Au début, elle a eu des hauts débats, des beaux débats. Au début, c'était des bons débuts, des beaux débuts, des bruits, des bas, des gros débris, des bruits, des bras, des gros dégâts, des arts, des ou, face au tournement des mots, le détournement des mots, contournement des mots, démocratie des parlementaires qui parlent et menteurs, palabreurs, palabrons, palarabie, pas à l'abri des malappris, palabre n'est pas bon. Okay, so here's my English. At the start, there were some highs, some lows, some great debate. At the peak flow, it was a good debut. Some bonds, some goals, some lovemaking sounds, a lot of debris, some shards, some arms, some serious harm, some ahs, some oohs. Facing pain's agony, the diversion of words, suffering contortions, wordocracy of deputies who speak and bury me, bullshitters. Bullshitting's no refuge, hidden from the misunderstood, bullshit's no good. So the second set of poems I'm going to read are by a Argentinian writer, Carlos Gliar, who was born in 1960 in Buenos Aires, and he's a researcher, teacher, speech therapist, and writer. And I was in Barcelona for a conference, and as I always do, I go to bookstores and kind of look around and see what I can find, what interesting writers I can find. And so I found a book of his called No tienen prisa las palabras. So I said, let me read it through. And I said, let me try some translations. So here are 3 very short prose poems from his book. You asked me to hold up in the middle of the street. You asked me to give you a cigarette, to light it for you. You asked me for the time to direct you around a place I was unfamiliar with. You asked me to forget the question. You asked me the time again. You told me how cold it was. You asked me if I was from here. You asked me once again for a light because the cigarette had gone out. You left. You discarded me from your life forever. Behind a partially open window, a little boy on punishment tirelessly watches the other children playing. With his body, he shadows the movements of every one of them, enjoys and suffers every one of the other's vicissitudes, even though none of them sees him. He will turn out to be a good man if they allow him to go out into the world. And this is just a beautiful little line. The sound of a foreign language that opens your ears, but doesn't let you open your mouth. Okay. So I'm going to try something different. I've never done this before. I know I've presented poems by this poet before, but I've never shown any of his visual images, I don't think. So let's see if I can do this. Or maybe I did once. Okay. So I'm going to read several concrete poems by the Brazilian writer Arnaldo Antunes. And some of you may be familiar with Antunes. He's pretty famous. He's a musician, a writer, and a composer. He was a member of the Brazilian rock band Titans, which he founded in 1982 and then left in 1992. And he is currently a solo performer, but he does all kinds of things. I mean, he's kind of, a polymathic figure. in Brazil, but is known in you know, kind of around the world. And he's performed with some of the great Brazilian musicians like Marisa Monte, Tribalistas, and Carlinhos Brown. So here are 3 poems by Arnaldo Antunes. So, and I just love concrete poems, so let's go through them. So, perder libertad, or losing liberty. Tirar a asa e voa. Spread your wings and fly. Or she or he spreads out his or her wings and flies. Okay. And this is an interesting little quartet of concrete poems. So I will read the English and no, I'll read the Portuguese and English and see if we can play with this. Imagigabites. Imagigabites. Invento vento dentro. I invent the wind, or I invent wind within. Mira na estrela e sopra. Aim at the star and blow. And you can think everything. Tudo pode ser pensado. Você pode pensar tudo. Everything can be thought. And a few more by Antunes. This is un fio, a strand. A strand of your hair is in my head, and there's nothing you might do to make that disappear. A strand of my hair is in yours, and there is nothing to substitute for it. Neither sun, nor moon, nor the light of the most intense thought that you may think, I think. Pensamiento. Thought. Thought comes from outside and thinks it comes from within. Thought that spits out what I think in my chest. Thought by the thousands per hour, every moment a torment. Why is it that I think now without my consent? If everything that commemorates has its impediment, if all that cries rises in its own ferment, thought, give it away, exit my mind. Thought, be gone, vanish in the wind. I won't sow seeds over its cement. O meu tempo. My time is not your time. My time is mine alone. Your time is yours and anyone's, including me. Your time is time that flies. My time goes only where I go. Your time is outside, dominating minds within, without moon or sun. Your time orders events. Your time is time, mine, me. Your time is only for everyone. My time is but one among many. Your time is measured in minutes. Mine changes and is lost amid others. My time is part of me, not of what I follow. My time will cease with me at my end. O buraco do espelho, the hole in the mirror. The hole in the mirror is closed. Now I have to stay here with one eye open, the other awake on the other side over there, on the side over there where I fell. Let me start again, okay. The hole in the mirror is closed. Now I have to stay here with one eye open, the other awake on the side over there where I fell. This side, there is no access, even if they were to call me by name, even if they allowed my return. Every time I go, the door vanishes. In the window disappears in the wall. The window disappears in the wall. The watery word dissolves in the thirsty seed of words the mouth yields before speaking and isn't heard. I've tried to sleep the entire night, 4, 5, 6 in the morning. I'm going to stay there in that chair, one ear alert, the other connected. The hole in the mirror is closed. Now I must remain in the now. I went through abandonment here inside the side of outside. And the last by Arnaldo Antunes, Coisa em si, thing in itself. Thing in itself does not exist. Everything tends, suspends, depends. The sea that waters, the island waters the continent, the air that breathes brings known fragrances. Thing in itself does not exist. Everything is near, tangential, inherent, stone, resembles seed, sunrise, sunset. Thing in itself does not exist, even if apparent thing in itself, thing born of its own dust alone, without shadow, on the wall, without margin or tributary. Not a thing exists like this, independent, without environment. There is no heart without mind, paradise without serpent, thing by itself non existent. What exists only is what feels. Check the time. Okay. This poem is a translation of one of the nocturnes, the many extraordinary nocturnes by the great Mexican poet Javier B. Urrutia. And I actually wrote a story in counter narratives about my imagined account of his meeting Langston Hughes. He actually translated Langston Hughes. But Urrutia was a great modernist poet in his own right, and he has these extraordinary nocturnes. And my Spanish isn't great, but I said I have to try to translate this. So okay, of course I would say please go look at his poems in the original Spanish, but I just want to give you my version of the Nocturno de Los Angeles, so the Los Angeles Nocturne. And he wrote this poem to Agustin J. Fink. You could say the streets flow sweetly into the night. The lights are not so bright that they actually reveal the secret that men who come and go know, because everyone is in on the secret. And nothing would be gained by shattering it into 1,000 pieces if, on the one hand, it is so sweet to keep and share it only with the one you choose. If each one were to say at a given moment, in only one word, what he thinks, the 6 letters of desire would form an enormous luminous scar, a constellation more ancient, more brilliant than any other. And that constellation would be like a sex organ burning in the deep body of the night, or better, like the Gemini who for the first time in their lives saw themselves brow to brow, eye to eye, and then took each other in their arms forever. Suddenly the river of the street peoples with thirsty beings. They stroll, they pause, they walk on by, they exchange glances, they dare smiles. They improbably couple up. There are shadowy bends and banks, edges of indefinite and bottomless forms, and sudden blinding shafts of light and doors that give way to the slightest pressures. The river of the street stands deserted for a moment. Soon it seems to rearrange itself by itself, longing to begin again. For a moment it stays paralyzed, mute, yearning, like the heart between two orgasms. But a new pulsation, a new beat casts into the river of the street new thirsty beings. They cruise, intermingle, lift off. They fly above the earth. They swim on foot so miraculously that no one would dare say they were not walking. They're angels. They've come down to earth by invisible ladders. They come from the sea, that mirror of the sky and ships of smoke and shadow, to find themselves, conjoin themselves with mortals, to surrender their brows to the thighs of women. Let others feverishly caress their bodies as other bodies search for theirs until they find them, as they find them when closing their lips on the same mouth, wearing out their mouths unused for so long, setting free their tongues of flame, chanting the songs, the pledges, and the curse words in which men concentrate the ancient mystery of flesh, blood, and desire. They take assumed names, divinely simple. They call themselves Dick or John or Marvin or Lewis. In no way beyond their beauty can they be distinguished from mortals. They stroll, they pause, they walk on by. They exchange glances, they dare smiles. They improbably couple up. They smile maliciously, ascending the hotel elevators where they can still practice slow and vertical flight. On their nude bodies are heavenly marks, signs, stars, blue tattooed letters. They fall back into bed, drown themselves in pillows that make them recall for a moment the clouds. But they close their eyes in order to give themselves up to the pleasures of their mysterious incarnations. And when they sleep, they dream of mortals, not of angels. Let's see how much time do I have? Okay. So I'm going to read a short story, very, very brief. It's almost like a prose poem by the Brazilian writer João Willis, and I'll conclude with a very short poem by the Cuban writer Jesus Coscalce. So João Willis was born in 1974, and he is a writer, journalist, media personality, and was the second out gay member of the, I think, House of Deputies in Brazil, and he had to leave Brazil a few years ago because of threats on his life, because he was very outspoken. And he's from the state of Bahia, and so this is a poem called Mother of the short story, short sort of prose piece called Mother of the Monster. It gives us kind of a feeling of the world that he's sort of writing about. And it's from the book Aflitos, which is both the name of a neighborhood in Brazil and also means afflicted. Mother of the Monster. In the beginning came the pallor and the light pains. In those days, Maria de Conceição began to also have dreams of winged beings who seemed to her to be angels. Now the pains grew, and Conceição, already so pale, turned transparent. When that happened, she was no longer eating, and her stomach had grown beyond its normal size. Conceição's parents initially thought that the daughter had committed fornication, disobeying the law of Moses, lying with some man before matrimony. But the pastor of the church, an upright man in whom she could confide, told them that the girl had gotten pregnant from the Holy Spirit. Conceição, blessed art thou amongst women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Neighbors of the now saintly one, doubting the words of this man in a suit and a necktie who brought together a multitude of poor people every day to sow the divine words, called for the doctors to visit her. Before they could conclude their consultation, the doctors were expelled from the house under insults and curses. Hypocritical Pharisees, how do you dare doubt the word of the pastor? Afterwards, a woman made her way to one of the doctors and asked him, "Is the pastor sure? Will she be the mother of God?" The doctor answered her, "No, my dear lady, she's the mother of a monster." From that day forward, Conceição stayed locked up in her house. The pastor told the girl's parents he'd received a visit from a heavenly angel announcing the birth of the Messiah the following week. The days crawled forward. During this time, the residents of this area, one of the most wretched in the region where children played with worms, converted to the religion of the pastor, guaranteeing peace and happiness after death. Finally, the great day arrived. Conceição, who had remained shut away until then, was taken to the church. Her emaciation only heightened the voluminous size of her stomach. Now free of any bindings and laid atop the altar, Conceição screamed with hallucinations and debated with the forces that lingered there. The cries were so loud that they stifled the glorias and hallelujahs of the faithful. The pastor asked that everyone present keep their eyes closed, since the birth of the Messiah would be too dazzling. The faithful obeyed, and so they were until the cries of the girl ceased. Their eyes opened, and did not see the pastor, only the cadaver of the girl atop the altar, victim of cancer of the ovaries. Everyone retired from the church slowly, including the parents of Conceição, leaving only the silence and the Holy Spirit hovering above the room. And I'll end with a very short poem by Jesus Coscause. And the musician and composer, M.R. Daniel, sent me this some years ago. And I printed the poem in Spanish on my blog, Jay's Theater, and sort of translated it in my head. And then, I was rereading it recently, and I said, why don't I just try to translate this and read it at this reading. So I'll close out with this poem, and it's called Mirando Fotos, looking at photos, by Jesus Coscause, who lived from 1945 to 2007, and he was a very important Afro-Cuban poet and figure in his country, and of course in the Caribbean. Looking at photos, Dagmaris walking away on the beach. Asuncion, her fan, her trim dew. Gloria, 2 days before dying. Roberto, pointing to nothing. Idermis, behind Oscar, after Jorge. I, so far away, I cannot make myself out. My brother, wasting a smile. My aunt, as ugly as the word itself. Grandmother, in her best days. Grandfather, with a perfectly tied tie. My father, drunk again. My mother, like a perfume spilled in the distance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was absolutely exquisite. The care and the attention to detail and sounds that are in these translations is just stunning. Thank you. We're all back for the Q&A.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, thank you so much, John. Thank you, Nick. Imogen and I have questions, but I would like to invite, I feel like we can stick around for another 15 minutes, something like that. We can invite you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to send questions to our panelists. And while I have a kind of really big picture question, and I also have a really narrow question, and the narrow question is for Nick. And I'm curious about the word tragedy in Tragedy of a Beardless Boy. And I say this because this is, what I did for my day job when I actually got paid to research stuff, which I don't anymore. But so is this a word that you would also use for like a tragedy that you would put on stage? Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. It's a great question. Um, the Turkish word is tragedia. You know, it's a loan word, obviously, from some Latin language. You know, if I were to describe a tragedy in Turkish, like some tragedy that befell someone that I know, you know, I wouldn't use the word tragedia. It's, you know, it feels like a loan word. So yeah, you know, I would probably use a different word for tragedy, at least, you know, in 2021. It definitely, yeah, it definitely feels like a loan word, probably from French, in the original.
Interesting. But could you use it? Okay, so that's helpful. Would you use it in a theatrical context? So I mean the word is Greek originally. I don't know if that's how it gets into Turkey, although it might. Or sorry, into Turkish. So that might be it. But would you use it for so you wouldn't use it for like something that happens to somebody you love, right? But would you use it for like you're putting on a play? What kind of play is it? It's a tragedy.
Probably not. No. So there's a tragedia, which is what Özger himself uses, tragedia. But then there's like tragedy, which is like you know, just like a sort of localization of, I'm guessing French, you know, tragedy. Yeah, it's like, it feels weird in the Turkish tragedia, to sort of be put that way, but it's also sort of, I think, what one of the reasons why I find this, you know, it's not so in Turkish it's like sakalsız bir olanın tragediyası. It's not sakalsız bir olanın tragediyası. It's like I don't know, there's something sort of haptically, you know, like texturally different about the title of the book.
That's helpful. That's interesting. Okay, cool. So there is well, I have another question for both of you. And I think I'm going to ask that, and then there's something in the Q&A. And Imogen might have questions as well, but I'm going to take as well. Cool. I'm going to take like a sort of, you know, hostesses privilege. I want to return to the question of internationalism, and specifically here I'm thinking, John, about your essay, Translating Poetry, Translating Blackness, and your call to reconfigure how we think about the world through translation, and especially literary translation of Black authors in the Global South, writing in non-European languages. And it strikes me that one of the dynamics this call is intervening in is a particularly narrow consciousness on the part of North Americans about social dynamics, history, the global extent of racial capitalism, and the multiple forms of work across history against it. And I'm also thinking about a conversation Nick and I had a couple days ago about Özger writing his poems in the late 60s and how that global conjuncture looks very different when viewed from the perspective of the Global South than from, say, Paris and Berkeley. So an open question for both of you. Are there specific places or projects where you think that translation at this juncture can make a meaningful intervention into this consciousness and its particular limitations? Are there particular places where you're working on this, where you think somebody should be working on this? I'm curious what that looks like.
Well, let me just say, I want to give tremendous praise to the many translators out there who are doing extraordinary work. I mean, I think even a few years ago, if you looked at the kinds of work that was being translated, I think we're in a different place now. And I mean, I think it's, of course, there's still extraordinary challenges and things, but that are in hurdles that people, you know, have to surmount. But I just think of, like, you know, seeing work being translated from places like Equatorial Guinea. I just think of all of the the many poets, American poets and translators who are bringing work, just from right across the board in Mexico into English, so that we can sort of hear these voices, we can see these voices. I think about, the great translators, for people who are translating, work from Cuba, from Brazil, from Lusophone, some of the Lusophone African writers, the Francophone African writers. I think about some of the wonderful translations of work coming out of of work from Korea, and East Asia and South Asia. I mean, I think about the translators who are working in the various languages of India. So I feel like that this work is happening. I mean, when reading work of someone like Sunjata, this is a voice that usually is not, when people are talking about French literature, Francophone literature, this is not a voice we hear. So I just want to say that I do think this work is happening, and I want to just encourage it. I mean, because it is so important. I mean, part of the challenge then is, once the work is out, how do we get it to people, right? How do we let people know? I mean, I think one of the beauties, there are many, not so good aspects to social media, but one of the beautiful things about social media is that it makes possible, through a number of platforms, to make work available. You can post things on YouTube, you can post things on Instagram, you can direct people to things, or show short clips on Twitter, and even Snapchat. I mean, there's just many ways of distributing this work. And so the goal, I think, one of the goals I hope that as we go forward, is to see how we can make sure that more and more people know and have an understanding that this work is out there, because it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. There are now questions pouring in. So, I mean, Nick, if you want to answer the question that I posed, you're welcome to, but also you guys, can you see the little Q&A box? If you want to just like dive in, you're welcome to do that, or I can throw stuff at you. Up to you.
Well, just to sort of build on the question that you posed, Kay, that John just answered, I think, there's a certain kind of like liberal conception of translation, right, as sort of building these bridges across cultural difference, that make possible certain kind of contact zones between different cultures that ostensibly allow us to have more empathy for one another and sort of like recognize our shared human condition or something like that. And that, like, that's a project that is like sort of very ideational. I think the kind of translational praxis that I have is one that is a bit kind of maybe pushes against that. It's just that it's not a question of expanding the scope of who has the capacity to speak in the world, as so much as a question of like interrogating who is it that has the right to speak in the world, in the sort of capital W, capital L, like world literature. I mean, I don't know. I've thought a lot about also like refusal, like what it means to like refuse projects, and like kind of what it means to refuse translation, like what, and this comes from my experience, I guess, as an anthropologist, like ethnographic refusal, like that there are certain stories that are like already, like kind of always already told about various cultural contexts, and like what does it mean to refuse kind of the compulsion on the part of world literature to narrate certain kinds of stories, and what is it that gets obscured by those narratives. That's something that I'm really interested in. That the kind of like, I don't know, that there's a whole kind of like political economic infrastructure that subtends the kinds of like literature that does get published in English from other contexts. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. There is a question for John. You read across a range of genres, concrete poetry, short stories, prose poem, etc. I read these authors as acutely attuned to form, even as the works move liquidly between them. That's a nice adverb. Any surprising or exciting findings you have come across recently as you translate from these multiple modes?
Always, I mean, I'm always finding something, coming across something new and interesting. I mean, one of the things I was thinking about is, with, for example, those Antunes uh, poems, of course, they're meant to be viewed, they're visual poetry, because of the concretion. But I thought, what happens if you read them aloud and sort of play with them? And of course, I'm thinking, Antunes is someone who's also very attuned to the to Portuguese and of course in English and multiple languages. You can move between multiple languages. So I mean, what does it mean to then? Because usually when we think about concrete poetry, we don't read it aloud. We just view it. What happens when you read it aloud, and what happens when you try to play with thinking about that relationship between the visual and the oral? So, but I would say yes. I'm always learning something. I mean, with that Sunjata poem, I thought this poem is. I'm sort of fascinated by poems that I consider to be kind of impossible to translate, because they depend so much on the resources of the source language. And so his poem, in a sense, I mean, you look, okay, there's no way that you can capture the richness in his original French, right? Which, sounds like slam, as I said, slam and hip hop. On the other hand, I thought, okay, well, how can I think about form? How can I think about sound? How can I think about play to capture, if not, to the kind of the the sort of strictest meaning, to capture as much as possible, but also that the kind of the trace of feeling, to use, I'm sort of butchering her beautiful phrase, but that kind of that trace of a feeling, right? The trace of a sense, to use Eunson Kim's concept, in English, right? And so you get some of that rhythm, you get some of that movement, and you actually, of course, get some of the exact, translation, but you also get something else. And I'm also fascinated by that loss, what's lost, and coming to terms with that. I think that one of the other questions asked about this, how do you think about what's lost? And of course, I feel like in translation, something is always lost. I mean, in that Coscause poem, I know, of course, if Spanish were my first language, that there are particularities to what he's saying. I mean, he says corbata contenta, right? Which is sort of like happy tie. But in English, just sort of like, what does this mean? I'm thinking, the ties, like tied tight, right? It's like it's beautifully tied, right? So how do you lose something, but you gain something? Because I feel like, it's still important to try to bring that particularly in poetry, right, that feeling over into English, right, as much as possible, right, so that the reader is left with something that they carry with them. And I feel like something does resonate in that carrying over and that loss.
Yeah, just to read that question out loud, the question asker says, I am thinking of Fanon when he writes, to speak another language is to enter another consciousness. As you process what translation means, what do you think is an unavoidable loss in translating a work? And how do you come to terms or not with that loss? And it sounds, John, like one of your responses is to really work with that. Like this is not an aesthetic lack or emptiness or void. It is an aesthetic constraint. And so constraints are generative. And then there's this like interesting, which is not to say that it's, there's nothing going on. There is something going on there, but it like that constrains how language and energy has to move. And that one of your responses is to, like attend to say something like, I don't know, structures of feeling through like through sound, which I like sort of patching that back to the translation of the Oscar. I mean, I like just loved so much how this thing, sorry, Nick, that just to go back to our personal conversation, but we were texting about this, like his just like proclamations, like these like total, he's just going to say life is a tragic homosexual, and this kind of like, these like declarative claims, that like take this very, I don't know, it's like very this very like strident attitude at the world, which is like sort of wonderful to hear. But sorry, did you have any thoughts, Nick, about this question of translation and loss?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I mean, one of the sort of very interesting things about Turkish is Turkish has no there's no gendered pronouns. There's no he or she or whatever. You know, it's all sort of compressed into one singular pronoun. But there's no articles, and then there's no prepositions. And kind of what that means is you know, when you're translating, you have to introduce so many more words to achieve the kind of semantic meaning of a poem that it feels so clunky. You're just, you know, I don't know, dealing with like so many more extra words. And so, you know, I think like I said at the beginning of my piece, like I typically translate prose only, and so sort of to venture into this, you know, project of translating poetry, it's like there's so much you have to deal with because you have to add so many words that make the poem so much more clunky and that really like take away from the economy of words of the original. And I mean, you can call that a loss. You can also call that, I don't know, a kind of restraint maybe. But I think, you know, as John said, like the task of the translator there is to sort of lean into the things that get lost, and sort of try to like sort of play in that space where you as a translator have agency to, like, you know, you're departing from the original language and you have to like make choices of your own that you know, impinge upon perhaps the sort of semantic kind of originality of the piece. And it can be actually really like transformative, or really, you know, it like configures the work in a different way, but that's also not like, it's a loss, but it's also a gain, right? You know, and sort of finding a space within those choices to let the poem redound upon the English language in new or weird ways is actually, I think, really where the translator's agency and like skill and like capacity really resides.
Yeah, I like that formulation too, new and weird. May we always be so lucky as to be both. I'm thinking when you're talking about adding in articles, I wrote these poems a couple years ago, which were like poems without an H, so like lipogram, but took out this particular letter, and I had a reason for doing it, but then I realized that meant I couldn't use definite articles or demonstrative adjectives, and like writing several poems without ever saying the is like really hard and kind of fun. I sort of recommend it as an exercise in economy. Nick, there is a final question for you, which is, how did you discover Özgür? How did it feel to meet the author for the first time? Meet via their work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't born before 1972, so unfortunately, I was never able to meet Özgür himself. The first time that I encountered Özgür's work was on like a sign that was held at a Pride March. You know, I'm trying to remember what the line was, but you know, he's someone who's been taken up sort of variously on the one hand by a kind of like chauvinistic, like Turkish, like mainstream, you know, a kind of chauvinistic Turkish left, and then also, you know, by kind of queer movements, you know, since the mid-1970s. And I encountered him through friends of mine who like told me what it meant, that like, you know, like where the soldiers of Zeki Moran, who, you know, I showed in one of the screen shares. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to sort of look at Özger as a sort of almost like fulcrum of political imagination in the early 1970s. You know, where the left is kind of filiating off from a kind of like sexual political struggle. You know, it's also like the kind of the Stonewall moment, and like what it means to sort of, I don't know, think those things together, to think what it means to conceptualize a kind of sexual politics in conjunction with a kind of labor politics, you know, in this moment of, in Turkey at least, but also kind of across the global South. The rise of a kind of totalitarian or fascist political hegemony. That there's something there about I don't know, you know, like thinking how the self relates to others, or thinking how the self occupies a space in social life, that is both like sexual and political. It's something that I find to be like endlessly interesting, and yeah, that's why I really love Özger.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I have a question for John. Kind of switching directions a little bit. I'm thinking about something that you said. I see my translations as a lifeline linking me to other writers and cultures across the globe. And I'm thinking about that quote and your book, Counter Narratives, and the kind of aesthetic that you approach translation with, and then the way that you work in your prose or your fiction work. And so I'm kind of wondering if you could speak a little bit about how your vision for translation translates itself into your fiction.
That's a good question. I think whenever this question comes up, I answer it in a different way. So, if people have heard me answer it before, you know, this may be slightly different. But I think, well, so let me just say this. After I translated Hilda Hill's Letter from a Seducer, one of the questions that often came up was how did Hill's influence you, or did her work influence you at all? And of course, I always said yes, because the truth is yes, tremendously. And one of the things I'm going to say is that I felt like, you know, there was incredible daring that Hilda Hill displayed in that book. I mean, extraordinary daring, really. Thinking about her very marginal position in some ways in that society. She had become marginalized. Thinking about her interests that sort of ranged beyond the mainstream, and how she wanted to put it, had been putting it in her work, and put it in that book. Thinking about how she was processing the kind of political situation in Brazil. She had shifted to prose after the dictatorship took control in the late 60s, and first to plays and then to prose. And then as the country was returning to democracy of a sort, she wrote these extraordinary books. And she was, you know, one of the other things was, you know, a sense of, you know, not just being out of the mainstream, but not being read at all, right? Having a cult following, and wanting to say so much about the society, about the world in very interesting ways. This I mean, her range of references in that book, pardon me, in terms of excuse me, other literary texts, the intertextuality of the book is just extraordinary. So anyway, so I was thinking about, like, there was very much in my head, and I was thinking, every page to me of that translation is a failure, right? In a certain way. I mean, there's so much of that extraordinary language that I felt like I could only begin to capture and bring into English. And I think that a kind of humility was something that I brought. Both the push to be more daring when it came to counter narratives and other things I've written, but also that humility before the limits of what I could do, how I could capture and share her voice. I think are two things that I kind of carried with me, and I've tried to carry them forward. I mean, I'm not going to be writing a book like Letters from a Seducer, but I just think about the range of things I read. I mean, I read a selection from Jean Willis's beautiful little book Afflitus, and it's a book that kind of straddles the line between poetry and prose, with language that's incredibly spare, and that language captures the world. I mean, it's not just that he's describing the world of Afflitus and of this neighborhood in Salvador de Bahia, but he's embodying that world right in the language. And that's also something I want to learn, because it might not be as market friendly, let's say, as publishers and agents and people want, but of course sometimes you have to do another kind of work, and that's the kind of work that I'm interested in translating into English, but also in writing myself.
Amazing, thank you.
Absolutely. I don't know. I mean, there's something about poetry where that maybe it's easy to say because there is no market for poetry in the Anglosphere, but also fuck the market. Like, it's a little cheap to say that. I'm not saying it's, but also, like, none of us are sort of, I don't know, we're not renouncing the world aesthetically because it refused us first. John, Nick, thank you both so much. This was exquisite.
Thank
like
you.
Just a totally a really
Thank
exciting discussion. If you have not donated yet, please do donate. To all donations go to our readers. Next week, please join us once again for Amber Dawn and Kai Cheng Tom. And otherwise, I think we'll say good night.
Yes.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you for coming. See you next week.
Stay safe.